welcome to another episode of the Psychology of Games podcast. My name is Dr. Jamie Madigan, and as in every episode, am your host. I dive into the psychology literature and bring back information that I hope will help you understand why games are designed and made the way they are so often, why they're marketed and sold how they are, and why gamers behave as we do when we play them. You can always go to psychologyofgames.com to find hundreds of articles that I've written on these topics, as well as other episodes of the podcast and how to subscribe to the podcast, how to follow me on social media. I'm at Jamie Madigan on Twitter, for example. And this is a one-man production, so if you want to help out and make sure that the future episodes of the podcast keep coming, you can go to patreon.com/POG to find out how to kick $1 or $2 a month my way. This is the episode about how not to be distracted by video games and other things. It's part 2 of a miniseries on books that I read this summer about psychology and video games. All right, let me describe a situation that I think most of us have been in. It's, say, 2 p.m., and you're sitting down after yet another short break to work or study or do chores or whatever other productive thing you've got in mind. But let's be honest, it's not the most interesting thing that you're sitting down to do. It's boring. It's another TPS report, another chapter in a class that you're struggling with, another load of laundry to fold because your partner refuses to accept that it would be acceptable just to move everything straight from the dryer to the dresser drawers. So you take out your phone. You open your web browser. Like, just for a minute, you think. Because you got a notification that you need to do the daily quest on a mobile game you've been playing. And it looks like there are unread posts in a subreddit for an upcoming game that you've got your eye on. And someone just replied you on Twitter. And oh, look, it's a notification saying that one of the Twitch streamers you follow has started streaming. So the next thing you know, the time you were going to spend doing the productive thing is gone. At best, you're going to have to stay late and do the thing. At worst, you've blown your chances of doing it entirely. Video games and other services like social media are often designed to distract us from doing other things that we may ultimately want to do more. They sip away at our time, they drag at our attention. Sometimes this is fine, as most of you listening to this podcast know the value of time well spent with a good game. Sometimes we want to be distracted, but sometimes we don't. The good news is there are things that you can learn about your own psychology that can help you better engage with games and other distractions on your own terms. In this episode of the Psychology Games podcast, I'm talking with Nir Eyal, author of the new book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. That's coming up, well, right now. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the interview portion of the podcast. I have got a returning guest this episode. We've got Nir Eyal. He is an author, a consultant. He kind of is a Renaissance man who does a lot of different things. But more importantly, he's a Wall Street Journal bestselling author of the book called Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And then more relative to our discussion today, he's also the author of the newly released book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. So Nir has taught at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and Design. He's consulted with business people on how to build engaging products. And he's even started and sold a couple of his own companies along the way. Nir, welcome back to the podcast.
Great to be back. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so we had you on a while back to talk about your first book, Hooked, the book about how to build habit-forming products, and kind of discussed how that could relate to games and social media that a lot of the listeners are familiar with and how those same principles came into play. So if anybody wants a deeper dive on that stuff, they can go listen to that episode of the podcast. But I wanted to talk to you about Indistractable as well. So you sent me an advanced copy of the book, which I appreciated, and I've read it cover to cover and enjoyed it. But for everybody else, can you kind of give us an overview? You know, what is the book about, and what might people get out of it? And in particular, what might gamers get out of it?
Yeah, so it's really about how to control your attention and choose your life. A lot of what we've heard over the past about a year or so, we're calling it the Tech Lash, is a lot of criticism over some of the technologies that we are using these days as becoming these tools of distraction or addiction, as has been said by some tech critics who say it's hijacking our brains and it's making us do things that we don't want to do. And so partly this book is a response to, I think, a lot of really shoddy science out there, a lot of fear mongering. It's ironic, of course, that the media loves this stuff, right? The traditional
it's
media
headlines.
It's amazing, right? Because it's talk about the pot calling the kettle black, right? The newspaper is, the traditional media is falling over themselves to talk about this story of how technology is melting your brain and hijacking your brain and causing addiction, etc. Meanwhile, they do that because they're in the same exact business as the very companies they're criticizing. They're all attention merchants. They monetize eyeballs in the exact same way.
Probably using a lot of their same technology.
Exactly. It's amazing. I was reading a story about dark patterns the other day in the Wall Street Journal. Who uses dark patterns? I tried to cancel my Wall Street Journal subscription, and they use the Roach Motel dark pattern. So it's amazing. So partly it was a reaction to this Tech Lash that I'm not a tech apologist as an insider, nor am I a whistleblower. I think that there are clearly a lot of things that are wrong with the tech industry, a lot of things we need to examine, particularly when it comes to big tech companies. I think their monopoly status, data incursions, their role in elections, lots of things that they need to be held accountable for. But this one particular narrative that technology is the source of the problem is not only wrong, it's harmful because it leads to learned helplessness. When people are told that technology is hijacking your brain, that your kids are using these things because they're addicted, they stop trying. They make excuses. And so so that's a big part of what I wanted to combat, is to kind of shed some light on what's really going on here to get to the root cause of distraction. So that's the first reason. The other reason is a very personal reason. I found that I was getting distracted by many of these tools. And frankly, I didn't have a system in place to put these tools in their place. I really do believe that we can get the best out of these technologies without letting them get the best of us. But I didn't have a framework or a way to think about it in a way that I could practically use in my day-to-day life. And so that was a big part of why I wrote the book, is that I read every book I could find on the topic of distraction and focus, and and most of the books just said the same thing, which is get rid of the distraction, right? Stop playing video games, to get rid of your social media.
How about no?
Yeah, exactly. How
about I like those things at the appropriate times and amounts?
Exactly. And so that just wasn't a solution for me. And frankly, it didn't work.
Yeah.
The digital detox, the 30-day plans, they don't work because they don't get to the source of the problem. So that's kind of the stage setting for why I wrote this book.
Okay. So let me ask you kind of a gotcha question.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Okay.
I'm going to try to get you.
I'm bracing.
So there was actually a Twitter thread about this the other day where somebody was kind of laughing at what they saw as the irony of the Indistractable book, because your first book, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, was about how to build products that people develop habits around and that will potentially distract them. And then this book is about how to not be distracted by products that are built to form habits and distract you. So is this a little bit of you creating the disease to sell the cure?
Well, yeah, I love that every time someone points this out, they think it's so novel, as if I haven't thought about it. Oh my God, I didn't realize I spent 5 years writing a book that could do this. Of course I realize this. And I think that there, if you look on the surface, I mean, this is a classic example of people judging a book by its cover. The person who made that comment, and I understand the reaction. But of course, they didn't read the book. The book isn't even out yet when they made this comment. And the fact is, there really isn't a dichotomy here, that we can use the psychology of product design, of consumer psychology. We can use these tools and techniques for good. Of course, we can use these tools. I mean, in the 5 years since Hooked has been out, it's not the big tech companies who I wrote this book for. It's not the social networks that use my book. They're the case studies of how to do this kind of stuff, right? They're the examples in the book. So of course they've been doing this for much longer than my book's been available. And since the book has been available, the whole point of why I wrote Hooked was to democratize these techniques. So I've heard from companies, almost every day I hear of someone using the product in unbelievably productive ways. The companies like Paga, which has brought millions of previously unbanked people in Africa online for the first time. Kahoot, the world's largest educational software, uses the hook model. Fitbod is an app that gets people into the habit of exercising in the gym. These are wonderful habit-forming products that help improve people's lives. And that was always the intent of the book Hooked. In fact, there's only one app that has an entire chapter devoted to it. The only case study, I look at bits and pieces of other people's services and products, but the only case study of the entire Hook model, the entire book, the last chapter of the book is not a social network. It's not a game. The app I profile is the Bible. The Bible app is one of the most popular apps in the world. Hundreds of millions of people use this app. It could be billions at this point because the book was written 5 years ago. And, they use the hook model. And so I picked that example for a very specific reason. I didn't pick a social network. I didn't pick a video game. I wanted the Bible app because, what you think about the Bible app tells me a lot about how you're going to judge behavioral design tactics. Because if you think, by the way, let me just tell you a quick side note, a story I have to tell you. That Bobby Greenwald, the CEO of the Bible app, told me this story of a user who sent him an email who said that he was on his way into a strip club. And just then the Bible app sent him a notification with a verse. And he realized the Lord was telling him to turn around, and he did so because the Bible app, told him to. And so,
was the verse about strip clubs? Or
maybe
Sodom and Gomorrah, maybe, or
I don't know. But he turned right around, and so how you think about the Bible app says a lot about how you think about these tactics as well. Because if you think that the Bible app is a force for good in the world, it helps people give meaning to their lives, it brings them together, then you love it. And if you think that it's not a force for good, if you think that it sows divisiveness and splits people along ideological grounds, then you don't think it's a good thing. And I wanted it to be so because the same thing that holds true with the Bible app also holds true with social media and video games, right? Are these things good? Are they bad? Yes. The answer is both. It depends. And I think that's really what's been missing from the debate around all this stuff is that everything needs to be one or the other, right? It's this binary thinking, good versus evil. Well, there's nuance here. It depends who's using it, how much they're using it, what they're doing instead of. There's a lot more nuance here, and I think that needs to be added to the conversation here. So it's not a contradiction, to answer your question. We can use habit-forming design tactics to build healthy habits in users' lives, to build the kind of products and services people want to use. And we can also become aware of these tactics to make sure that we don't overuse them in our own lives.
So let's take a step back and talk about hooked model and other things you've written there, maybe as a way to set the stage for Indistractable and the problem of being distracted that it aims to resolve. What are some of the qualities of habit forming games, especially like mobile games, but particularly any kind of game? What are the things that make them habit forming and thus potentially distracting when you don't want them to be?
Yeah. So whether it's a game, whether it's a social media network, whether it's cable television, whether it's a movie, a book, many of these same principles hold true. So the basic hook model, just to give you the 30-second overview, is this 4-part model of a trigger, an action, a variable reward, and an investment. And it's through successive cycles through these 4 steps that our habits are formed, that we learn a new behavior to solve some kind of discomfort. So it starts with an internal trigger, it starts with an external trigger, the ping or ding or ring on your phone that tells you what to do next. Exactly. Then you've got the action phase, which is the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. So it's opening the app, it's starting to play the game. The variable reward is something that scratches the user's itch, gives them what they want, and yet leaves them wanting more. Some bit of variability, uncertainty, intermittent reinforcement. I'm sure most of your listeners know all about B.F. Skinner. And then finally, the investment phase is where we put something into the experience to make it better with use. So anytime you accrue anything, or anytime you give the company data, content, reputation, you're investing in the platform. You're making it better and better with use. And of course, you're also loading the next trigger with your actions to bring you through the hook once again, so that eventually, through successive cycles, through these hooks, the company doesn't need to send you those external triggers. They're queuing you off of internal triggers. So when you're bored, exactly. So, and this isn't necessarily sinister. I think folks who aren't actually in the industry tend to think of this as mind control, that you can get people to do whatever you want, and nothing could be further from the truth, that it's really hard to change people's behavior. And people who have built product know this. What this does for you, however, is give you a framework for designing the kind of products and service people want to use, as opposed to the kind of products that they disregard, or that their boss makes them use, if we're talking about enterprise software.
That sort of sets the stage then, and I guess the issue is that we enjoy doing these things and we get something out of them, and we choose to do them by and large, but sometimes we want to do other things. We want to work, or we want to spend time with our family, or we want to exercise, or do something else, besides play games or read Reddit or scroll through Instagram or any of those different things. In the book Indistractable, you talk a lot about those internal and external triggers. Is that the same types of internal and external triggers that you just talked about in relation to the hooked model?
It sure is, exactly. And so that's why it's kind of a continuation on a theme. But if we want to really talk about the nature of distraction, let's just define it for a quick minute.
Sure.
When we talk about what do we mean when I say distraction? So the best way to understand what distraction is to understand what it is not. The opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. So both words come from the same Latin root. They both end in the same 5-letter word, action. So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want to do, things that you do with intent. Both traction and distraction come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want to do, things that you do with intent. The opposite of traction is distraction, any action that you take that pulls you away from what you do. So this is a really important framework to understand, because it frees us from this ridiculous moral hierarchy that, you playing video games is somehow morally inferior to me playing crossword puzzles and watching football on TV. It's rubbish. They're both pastimes. If they're done with intent, if they're consistent with your values, do it. Enjoy them.
Okay.
Yes.
I will.
There you go. I don't need to preach to you. But I think that this is kind of what we hear in the popular press these days, is that, some things somehow are inferior ways to spend your time. And people take the moral high ground that Fortnite is rotting your brain, but somehow, my 4 hours of watching the NFL on TV, that's perfectly fine. Rubbish. Yeah. It's the same thing. As long as you do it with intent, it's wonderful. The problem, however, though, I think, is when we don't use these things on our schedule, when we use it on the game maker or the app maker's schedule. I think that's when we start to get into some trouble here. And this occurs when we don't understand what is triggering us to either traction or distraction. So that's where we get back to external triggers and internal triggers. External triggers, again, are these notifications, the pings, dings, and rings, which, if we don't do what I call hack back these external triggers, so that we make sure that we only keep the ones that serve us as opposed to the ones that we are serving, that can get us into trouble, right? We plan to be with our children, we plan to be with our friends, we plan to do work, and yet we get these notifications that prompt us towards distraction, something we didn't intend to do with our time. But of course, if you have time in your day planned for, gaming or watching a movie on Netflix or whatever it is you like to do with your time, then wonderful. Then that external trigger is perfectly welcome. But it turns out that the number one source of these triggers that prompt us to either traction or distraction are not the external triggers, but really it's the internal triggers. That most distraction, in fact, starts from within.
So give me, some examples of internal triggers.
Sure. So it's boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, any of these uncomfortable emotional states that prompt us to either traction or distraction. What makes the difference, of course, is, does it prompt us to deal with that uncomfortable sensation in a healthy way or in a hurtful way? Those are all those internal triggers. And of course, there are plenty of companies out there who love to form an association with those uncomfortable internal triggers. And of course, if we let them form an association, then we can become habituated to behaviors that we later regret.
So the difference between traction and intraction is just a matter of intent. Like, this is what I want to do.
Right.
And does that mean that you can flow between those two states?
Well, not really.
If I start off thinking, I don't want to do this, but then I start playing this game, I'm like, yeah, this is rad. I want to do this now, and I want to put off that other thing.
Well, it's really about intent. So the only way to know the difference between traction and distraction is to plan ahead. So so distraction is never good. Now, diversion, by the way, is a different thing. Diversion is just a refocusing of attention. So there's nothing wrong with a diversion. There's nothing wrong with getting out of your head for a while, for, experiencing flow in a game or a movie or a book. It's wonderful. It's a terrific sensation. Diversion, there's nothing wrong with, but distraction, there is always something wrong with. Distraction is something you did not intend to do. So the only way you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it is distracting you from. So if you put time in your schedule, here's the solution, is that when you put time in your schedule for whatever it is that you enjoy doing, then there's nothing wrong with it. It's traction. Whereas if you get distracted from what you plan to do, so the example that gets to me, or used to get to me before I found this methodology, is that I'd sit at my desk and I'd say, okay, now I'm going to do some hard work. Now I'm going to do that thing I've been procrastinating. I'm going to focus on this big project after I check email. Okay. Because email feels kind of worky, right? Email feels like it's kind of productive, right?
When you've read and replied to an email, that's pretty clear.
Right. Except for the fact that if that's not what I plan to do with my time, it is just as much of a distraction as watching YouTube or, playing a game or whatever when I didn't intend to. So it's really about, knowing this, understanding this fact that you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Whatever you plan to do with your time, it's wonderful. That's traction. Whatever is not what you plan to do would be a distraction.
Say it's it's Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Saturday morning, and I've got the day free, and I have decided that I want to sit down and edit a podcast or write an article for psychologygames.com or something along those lines. So it's actually a fairly typical Saturday morning activity for me. And I'd start to do that, but I'm having writer's block, and I decide, well, maybe I'll play a level or two of whatever game I'm into lately, or maybe I'll check email, like you said, or maybe I'll check out Reddit and maybe go through my Pocket, list of articles instead of doing what I intended to do. So what are your suggestions to me then of, how do I hack back in a case like that? What do I do to keep from being distracted?
Yeah, perfect. So now we have the four big pillars. So we talked about traction, we talked about distraction, we talked about internal triggers and external triggers. And so now we work our way through these four basic steps. The hardest part about writing my book, by the way, was whittling down the research, right? I had 350 pages in my first draft. My wife read it and said, oh my God, that's way too much. Nobody's going to read 350 pages of distraction. So I whittled down the research to these four fundamental pillars, and everything is backed with peer-reviewed studies. This isn't just my, personal methodology. And so here's what we do. The first step is to master our internal triggers, is to learn tactics to cope with discomfort, because fundamentally, all human behavior is motivated by a desire to escape discomfort. Most people don't see it this way. Most people think of Freud's pleasure principle, which is basically, that we all seek pleasure and avoid pain, carrots and sticks. Yeah. But it turns out that neurologically speaking, the only thing that motivates us is in fact discomfort from a neurological basis. Even the pursuit of pleasure, right? Even wanting something that feels good, craving, desire. There's a reason we say love hurts. These things are psychologically destabilizing. So that means if all behavior is spurred by a desire to escape discomfort, that means time management is pain management. And so if you sit down at your desk and say, okay, I need to edit this blog post, I need to do this difficult task, and you start identifying the internal triggers that drive you towards distraction, that's a huge step forward. And that has to be the first step. And that's what most of these books that try and help you focus and productivity tips and life hacks, et cetera, don't realize, is that if you don't deal with those internal triggers, it doesn't matter what the tool du jour is, right? Today it's video games, tomorrow it's social network, the next day it's television, the radio. I mean, this goes back since the dawn of time. People have been talking about how distracting the world is. And so if you don't deal with what is the emotion you are looking to escape and have techniques in place to deal with it in a healthier manner, you will always find some sort of distraction. So that's the first step, is to master internal triggers. And we can go into more depth around, nuts and bolts on how you do that. The second step then is to make time for traction. We said earlier that you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from.
Yeah, I like that mantra. I think I jotted that down somewhere.
Excellent.
Here.
Yeah. And frankly, in this day and age, the price of progress, the cost of having so many amazing tools and things that entertain us in our day-to-day lives is that it is very easy to find distraction, right? If you are looking for distraction, you will find it these days. And so
it's super easy.
And so the antidote to that is to plan your day, or somebody else will. And so that means not only planning the work you need to do, right? 9 a.m. I will be at my desk and I will write for 2 hours, or whatever the difficult task is that you need to do. I will work out. I will spend time with somebody, my friends, my family, whatever it is that you want to do to live out your values. And I'm not saying what your values should be. I'm just encouraging you to turn your values into time, but to also make time for those fun activities. So what a lot of people do are these like digital detoxes where they just, they swear off the games, they swear off the social media or whatever. And it turns out that abstinence can in fact backfire, that it causes this rumination cycle of don't do it. Okay, fine, I'll do it. And that giving in fact, feels really good. And it reinforces the exact behavior they're trying to stop. And this is why abstinence and just say no is often a tactic that backfires for people. Much better to not only plan the productive tasks, the writing, the hard tasks, or whatever it is that you do that's difficult, that you have trouble not getting distracted from, but also put time in your calendar for those fun tasks. So okay, I'm going to do that hard task from 9 to 10:30. At 10:30, I'm going to take a break and do the fun stuff, right? And plan time for gaming, for social media, for whatever it is that otherwise would distract you, because then you are turning what would otherwise be a distraction, if you were using it when you didn't intend. By planning time for it, you have turned it into traction, and you can do it without guilt. And then the third step is to hack back the external triggers. So it turns out 2/3 of people with a smartphone never change the notification settings. What?
Yeah.
Like,
that's like the first thing
exactly.
I do. Exactly.
I mean, seriously,
I change them to all be like video game related. I think my notifications are all sounds from Dark Souls.
There you go. Right.
Now, but,
do we have any right to complain that technology is addicting us, that's hijacking our brain, if we haven't taken 10 minutes to change our notification settings? I mean, this is really simple stuff. It turns out, though, however, that our phones and our computers, that's the easy part. Much more pernicious distractions have to do with the environments that people don't consider. The open floor plan office, huge source of external triggers, right? Meetings. Oh my God, what a waste of time so many of our meetings are in the corporate environment. How do you make those indistractable? Group chat. So I work through these 8 different environments that we typically face, and I give techniques for how to hack back external triggers in each of them. And then finally, the fourth step is to prevent distraction with Pact. And this is all about using what's called a pre-commitment device. And this is one of the oldest techniques around. It's actually, Homer talked about it in the Odyssey 2,500 years ago. And this is just a tactic of using a pre-commitment, assigning in advance what you're going to do when you are likely to face distractions so that you can prevent it. So for example, if you want to work on a big project and it's really hard to stay focused during that project, we can use technology to prevent us getting distracted from technology. So every day when I sit down to write, I use this app on my computer called Self-Control, that with one click of a button, it blocks out all the distracting things that I don't want access to. It turns them all off so I can't get to them for a set period of time, like my Gmail account or Google or YouTube, etc. And on my phone, I use an app called Forest. And Forest, essentially, if you set an amount of time you want to do focused work for, you set the timer, and it plants a little virtual tree. Now, if you pick up that phone and do anything with it, the little virtual tree dies.
Aw.
The stupid little virtual tree. Like everybody says that.
Like a Tamagotchi.
Exactly.
Murders
you chop down the virtual tree. Good job, killer. And so
global warming. Exactly.
It's all you. Exactly. So it's a silly little thing, right? But it's enough of a commitment, enough of a pre-commitment to remind you, no, you made a promise with yourself. And those are just a few examples. There are actually 3 types of pre-commitments. They're effort pacts, price pacts, and identity pacts. And of course, from those 4 big steps, we can go into more depth in terms of tactics. But that's the strategy. The overall strategy is to master internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back the external triggers, and prevent distraction with pacts.
Okay. So yeah, let's go through each one of those and maybe give me an example of what people might find in the book. So, managing internal triggers, like what's one concrete specific tactic for doing that?
Yeah. So there's a few tactics. So there's actually 3 big ones for mastering internal triggers, and that is to reimagine the trigger, reimagine the task, and reimagine your temperament. Okay. And there's so many potential options, but there are many techniques out there that I've included in the book. Many of them are from acceptance and commitment therapy. And so one of the techniques that I use quite often is called this 10-minute rule. And the 10-minute rule says that you can give in to any temptation, any distraction in 10 minutes. And what you have to do in that 10 minutes is simply experience that sensation you are trying to escape and do what's called surfing the urge. So you can picture, a wave cresting and subsiding. And you can either, explore that sensation. Now, what you don't want to do, a lot of people will explore the sensation with contempt. They'll say, "Oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm deficient somehow. I must have ADHD. I must," And look, some people do have these disorders, but that's not, that's single digit percentages. Most of us are perfectly fine. There's nothing necessarily wrong with you. You're just a normal human being who experiences these uncomfortable states. And what we want to do is to simply ride out that sensation for that 10 minutes of time and do nothing else other than either get back to the task at hand or be with that sensation and explore it with curiosity for 10 minutes. And so sometimes, right before I find myself wanting to check my phone or check email or something when I want to be doing focused work, I'll tell my phone, "Hey Siri, set the timer for 10 minutes. And I'll follow this 10-minute rule. And about minute number 3 or 4, I'm back at work. But the hardest step is, of course, recognizing that sensation. So inside the book, Indistractable, there's a distraction tracker that helps you build this skill, this awareness of identifying that uncomfortable emotional state. So that's one tactic. Of course, we can also reimagine the task. So I give you ways to turn uncomfortable tasks into play. This is from the work of Ian Bogost, who I know you know.
I know of Ian, yeah.
Yeah, and he's done some great work around how we can, what he calls play anything, how we can turn, uncomfortable, unfun tasks into things that can be played, not by adding spoonful of sugar in the Mary Poppins way. That actually doesn't work all that well for very long, but we can actually turn mundane tasks into play, not for the sake of fun. He says you don't actually have to enjoy play. You just have to use play as a tactic to harness your attention and make sure that you don't get distracted. And so that's a tactic we can use. And then we can reimagine our temperament. There's a lot of folk psychology out there that really does backfire on folks. One of my least favorite psychology myths out there is the myth of ego depletion. Ego depletion is this idea that our willpower runs out like gas in a gas tank. And this came from the work of Roy Baumeister. And the idea was that, at the end of the day, you come home from work like I used to and say, I'm spent. And I've got no more willpower.
To eat cookies.
Exactly. Yeah. For me, it was Ben & Jerry's ice cream. So I'd sit down on the couch with Ben & Jerry's and turn on Netflix. And you see, I have an excuse. I'm spent. No more willpower left. Yeah. And it turns out that this is not true.
It's kind of been center stage on the psychology replication crisis.
Exactly. Except for this study by Carol Dweck that showed that actually ego depletion does exist for one group of people. And those are people who believe it exists. Okay. And so this is really telling, that people who believe in ego depletion are the ones who experience it. And that's why this advice, this section of the book is all about reimagining our temperament, to question our beliefs around the kind of person we are. If we think we have an addictive personality, if we think we have a short attention span, if we think we have run out of willpower, it of course becomes true. So we have to reimagine our temperament to make sure that we're not engaging in these self-limiting beliefs, which really don't serve us.
And when you talk about making time for traction, I think one of the techniques, like I can't forget if you wrote about this in the book or not, but one thing that I've been experimenting with for the last few weeks is time blocking on the calendar.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. So like from say 8 a.m. to about 6 p.m. every day, my calendar is full of something. Like there's generally something on there, even if it's just lunch or read or take a break. And then throughout there's also like specific work related tasks that I want to work on.
Perfect. Yes.
But the idea is that I know at any given time, like what I should be doing. And like you said, I know what I'm being distracted from if I become distracted. And it's kind of nice because it's real easy for me it sort of takes away the guilt or some of the anxiety about not knowing what I should be working on. Well, the thing I should be working on is what's on the calendar.
Exactly.
And that doesn't mean that I can't change it. If my boss requests a meeting, like something on the calendar gets bumped and it gets moved around, or if there's, extraordinary circumstances or anything. But generally I'm digging it, and I'm finding it helpful for, staying productive and then having time in there to just read or play games or take a break. And I know that like most nights, I can watch a show with my wife or hang out with my daughter or something like that.
Yeah, I'll take credit for it because that is I hope you learned it from my book, even if you didn't. But
thanks, man.
It's fantastic that you are using this technique. For me, it was a life-changing revelation that, I resisted this technique for so long thinking, this is so rigid. I need time for creativity. I need white space. What I didn't realize is that you can schedule that stuff too. That in this day and age, because it's so easy to get distracted, it's so easy to go off track, that if you don't plan stuff like creativity, like time to think, time to relax, time to take a walk, time to meditate, whatever it is that you want to do, that time has to be scheduled or it just won't happen. And so that's why I advise starting with these 3 life domains, where we start with the life domain of you, right? Things that you need to do for yourself, whether that's hygiene or your physical health or, acquiring knowledge. Where is that time on your calendar? Do you have time for it? The second thing is the domain of relationships. We are today experiencing this crisis of loneliness in this country. There's this loneliness epidemic. And part of it is because people don't have the regular gatherings that they used to in previous generations. Robert Putnam wrote about this in the late 90s in Bowling Alone, how America used to have bowling leagues and, of course, church groups that would meet regularly. Well, if people don't have that in their lives, and they don't need necessarily to join a religious institution to do this, but it does need to be somewhere on your calendar regularly, even if it's going out with friends for beers every Wednesday, or, having, I talk about this idea of a kibbutz, which is Hebrew for gathering. 4 couples that get together that my wife and I have instituted. It changed our life just to have, we know, same time, same place. Kids can come, but they cannot interrupt because, newsflash, kids can be distractions. It's not just the devices. If you're having a conversation with your friends and your kid wants a juice box or something, they are also a distraction. And so they need to take care of the problem on their own or unless someone's bleeding. That's our rule. If you're bleeding, you can interrupt us. If not, you need to go away. So
yeah, blood or fire. Those are the general rules. Yeah.
And so the final thing is the workplace. And this is the one that people do if they schedule. That's where they do schedule is the various tasks at work. But not just the meetings. People sometimes will just schedule meetings. No. You need to schedule the time for email, the time for focused work, the time for the important tasks that you need to get your job done. Those also need to be scheduled. And what I advise is schedule syncing, where we can, so many times a boss will just throw a task to an employee and say, here, do this, do this, do this. But that doesn't make any sense. Those are all outputs. What we have to discuss are what are the inputs to get that task done. And as knowledge workers, our input is our time. And so there needs to be a syncing process, and I tell you exactly how to do this, with our families, with our colleagues, where we look at each other's calendars. It takes 15 minutes a week, and we synchronize to make sure that our expectations are aligned. This is, I've been married for almost 20 years, game changer in my marriage, and I'm much more productive for it as well.
And then you talked a little bit before about hacking back those external triggers, and those are the things like squelching notifications that you don't need and using those apps and those programs to literally deny you access to certain websites and so forth. And then packs I thought was kind of interesting too. So that was sort of the fourth strategy for doing this. So can you give me a couple examples of that, or an example each of those different kinds?
Yeah. So hacking back the external triggers, that's not using the programs to keep you out. That has to do with changing the notification settings on your phone or your computer. That's about decluttering your desktop. Oh my God. I've seen people's desktops that are just explosions of distractions. So an easy win
causes me physical pain
right
whenever I see that.
Here's, this is a 5-second solution. Take everything on your desktop, create a folder, label that folder with everything, and put everything in it. And you can search for it later. You don't need all that crap. Email, there's probably the number one, the chapter that will save most people the most time in their life is this section on email, around how do you deal with this endless distraction that most people face around email. There's some very simple tips.
Batch your email. Do
that's
it twice
a big
a
one.
day.
That's a very big one. But also the way you label your emails. So, we have to realize that the place we waste time on email is not the checking. It's not the replying. It's in fact the rechecking. So what most people do when they check an email, they open an email, they read it, they tuck it away, they read the next one, they need to read the next one. Then they come back to it, a few minutes, maybe a few hours later. What did that email say again? Oh, I forgot. When does it need a reply? Oh, I forgot. So every time you get an email, you have three choices. You can either delete it or archive it, of course, or you label it by when it needs a reply, either today or this week. And then in your time box schedule, you have time every day for just the most urgent emails. So this will probably be 10 to 20% of your emails. So you'll get to inbox zero effectively every day, but only for the urgent messages. Then all of the non-urgent messages, you label them as this week. And then you have time in your calendar. For me, it's what I call Message Mondays, where I have a big 4-hour block to flush through all of those emails that can wait. Now, here's the amazing part. Not only, if we think about what's the first principle to getting fewer emails, sending fewer
Not
emails.
Writing so many.
Exactly. Because people play this ping pong game, right? Yeah. So in a given period of time, if you want to get less emails, you have to send fewer emails. And that means let the emails wait, the ones that can wait, because here's what happens. Many times, the emails don't even need a reply after a while. What seemed urgent in the moment, if you just give it a little time to marinate, people figure out their own issues, or the issue just gets crushed under the weight of some other problem. And so many of those emails you won't even have to reply to at the end of the week if you just let them marinate for a bit. So that's where we reply to the urgent emails today by labeling them as such, and the ones that can wait with this week, and we work through those during our time boxed schedule.
And then what about the packs?
Packs, okay.
So preventing distractions through packs.
Right. So we talked about effort packs. So one technique we can use for an effort pact is what we talked about earlier with Forest, or these other technologies that block out a potential. They don't just block out. They actually keep us in, which is where an app like Forest or Self Control might come in. And there's a few other tactics we can use. So those are effort packs, because it's putting a bit of friction, a bit of work between you and something you don't want to do. There are also price packs. So when we make some kind of wager where there's a price associated, some kind of cost associated with doing something we don't want to do. When I talk to folks who said they get distracted from physical fitness, they say, I just can't work out consistently. I always quit. And I said, well, what if we make a little bet? How much money would it hurt you to lose that would help you go to the gym? Right? Let's make a little bet here. And so
make it sting. So not $10.
Yeah.
But
so for me,
more for most people.
For the past, I used to be clinically obese. Now I'm at about 12% body fat. And I got into shape partially. This is the first time in my life where I've consistently worked out. And it's because every morning when I wake up, I go to my closet to get dressed, and I have a calendar in my closet, and taped onto the day's date is a crisp $100 bill. And every day I have a choice to make. This is called the burn or burn technique. Every day I have a choice to make. I can either go to the gym and burn some calories, do some kind of physical activity 6 days a week. That's the promise I made to myself. So I can either burn some calories or burn this $100 bill. And there's a lighter right next to my calendar. And so I can't give it away to charity. I have to burn the money. Now, it's been 3.5 years, and I've never burned the $100 bill, and I'm in the best shape of my life because I have a price pact with myself. If I don't do the behavior I want to do, it's going to cost me. Now, by the way, really important note here. This must come last. Okay. This technique can and will backfire if it's done before we do the other three. First, we have to master the internal triggers. Then we make time for traction. Then we hack back the external triggers. And only last do we use this technique of preventing distraction with pacts.
Yeah, I've also heard of a version of this where you can set up to like make a donation to a political or other cause that you would find odious, that you would really hate your money to go towards. And then it automatically happens if you don't stick to your plan.
Right. It's actually, the service is called Stick that does that.
Yeah.
There's also one other pact, a pre-commitment device, which is called an identity pact. And I think this one is actually the most interesting of the three. An identity pact says that we are more likely to do what we say we're going to do if we can create some kind of identity that we want to be consistent with, because fundamentally, long-term behavior change is identity change. And so this research comes out of looking at people who are religious adherents, that, if you associate with some particular identity or in a religious group, suddenly you don't need to expend the kind of willpower that someone else might. So for example, an Orthodox Jew doesn't say to themselves, I wonder if I should eat some bacon today. No, it's just something they don't do. Orthodox Jews don't eat bacon. A devout Muslim doesn't say, I wonder if I should have that gin and tonic. No, devout Muslims don't eat or don't drink alcohol. When I was a vegetarian, for 5 years. It wasn't difficult to not eat meat. I was a vegetarian. It's just it's my identity. It's who I was. And so this is why the book is titled Indistractable, because this is the new moniker. So the excuse for why you do these weird things, why your family says, hey, why do you keep such a rigid schedule? Or, why did you turn off the notifications on your phone and didn't respond to me in 30 seconds? You see, I'm indistractable. I'm the kind of person who does what they say they're going to do. I live with personal integrity. This is the kind of person I am. I am indistractable. And so that's
not you, it's me.
Exactly. It becomes a moniker that we can use to reinforce our identity. By the way, one of the best things you can do to reinforce that identity is to teach others. This is why every religion, every major religion, has proselytizing in it, built in, right? It's not only to find converts to join the flock, but it's also, and I cite studies in the book that show this effect, that it turns out that when we preach to others, we reinforce our own identity. Right? Yeah. This is why, there's that joke, how do you know someone's into CrossFit? Don't worry, they'll tell you. Right? They won't shut up about it.
Joke about vegetarians.
You can make this joke about it, all kinds of groups. Yeah.
People want they want their beliefs and their actions to be consistent. That's an old, well-known lever for motivating change and getting people to make decisions.
Right.
Totally.
And so we can use that. I think this is what we need as this kind of social antibody to prevent this distraction that many of us face, is to say, yep, I do things that are a little bit strange. You're right. I don't respond to text messages within 30 seconds. I take time in my day for focused work. I plan my day. I turn off these notifications, these 4 steps that we talked about. Why? Because this is the kind of person I am.
Cool. So let's kind of bring this back to the realm of video games. There's been, I don't know how closely you've been following all of this, but there's been debates about those dark patterns in game designs and different ways of monetizing everything from, loot boxes and the whole question of video game addiction and microtransactions and obfuscating things and making them, reducing friction to the point where it's a problem for some people. So are there any practices in making these sort of distracting games or similar products that you think the world would be better off without?
Yeah. So I advocate for what I call a use and abuse policy, that we need to acknowledge that any analgesic is potentially addictive. Anything that solves pain, if it's used by a sufficiently large number of people, will addict somebody. Now, addiction is an unfortunate byproduct of any product which is engaging, which solves pain, which helps people take their mind off of their discomfort. Those internal triggers that we talked about earlier. So it's so what should we do about this? I do not think it's ethical to have a business model that depends upon addicts. So there's certain companies I won't work with. I won't work with Las Vegas casinos. I won't work with, there are certain games out there.
Cigarette companies,
exactly. Even though, by the way, the vast majority of smokers, believe it or not, are not addicted. The majority of smokers are actually social smokers. They're not, the pack-a-day folks. However, the vast majority of profits, right? It's a very fathead business. By the same occurs with the alcohol industry in the United States as well. It's about 10% of the consumers make up 90% of the revenue. It's the 6-pack to 12-pack a day drinker. It's the pack-a-day smoker. That's the small proportion of people who are addicted, who are accounting for the profits. And we see similar dynamics in the gaming industry, right? We call them whales. And so industries that depend upon whales, I think that's unethical. So with the solution, I believe, is what I call this use and abuse policy, that we should have some kind of number that says, if you use this product for X number of hours per week, I mean, the silver lining of all this data that's collected on us these days is that these companies have, personally identifiable information about how much people use their products. And so whether it's a social network, whether it's a game, there should be some type of trigger that says, after you use this product X number of hours per week, we're going to reach out to you and ask and say, look, you're using this product in a way that may indicate you're struggling with an addiction. Can we help? Now, for some people,
so it's like the equivalent of when Netflix asks, like, you've been watching reruns of The Office for an awful long time now.
Exactly.
Are you okay,
still
buddy?
there? Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, this is very different from, I think, what there's legislation from Senator Hawley that wants to get rid of infinite scroll and get rid of autoplay. I think that's ridiculous, because for the vast majority of us, we're not addicted, right? Clearly, the vast majority of people, there's a lot of things out there that people can enjoy in moderation that is addictive, but not addictive for everyone, right? We drink alcohol. We're not all alcoholics. We have sex. We're not all sex addicts. And so, of course, the same thing happens with video games and social networks. So let's help the people who are really struggling, right? The people who are not of sound mind, and that would be two categories. Children. I think children deserve special protection, of course. And there's lots of things that children in society cannot do. And I think people who are pathologically addicted, people who actually are suffering from this disorder, they deserve special protections. But for the vast majority of folks, I think this is a personal responsibility issue, because, it's way too onerous. Do we really want Senator Hawley's plan to, every 30 minutes, we want Twitter to tell us, hey, you've been using it for 30 minutes. Do you still want to continue? It's ridiculous. Yeah. And, the funny thing is, last time I checked, Fox News and MSNBC were on autoplay for like the past, 15 years, right? Nobody, and you can get just as addicted to those things, and yet nobody's looking at old media for how it can potentially, have the same effects.
So are there any companies or media out there that are doing this? The kind of thing you described with the use and abuse policy and notifying people? And
the only one I know to date is Stack Overflow. So Stack Overflow, after 20 hours a week, you can't earn any more points. No matter how much you upvote and downvote, you can't earn any more points, because Jeff Atwood, he told me he wanted the product to be something that people, that is used to enhance people's lives and doesn't become their life. And so he intentionally put that breaker in there. And I think that's something that we can learn from and hopefully apply to other industries. I've been lobbying for the past 4 years I've talked to Facebook about this, and Google and Snapchat and Reddit. And I'm getting a little tired of them not doing something about it. And I think if they don't do something about it, and this is such low hanging fruit, right? By the way, I'm not saying we should cut people off. When I talked to Facebook about this, they said, okay, we did what you said. We looked for the people who are really, the 1% of users, the 2% of users who are using Facebook a lot. And we reached out to them and we offered, can we help? Can we help you dial it back, or provide resources to help you deal with this potential addiction? And sometimes they would say, yep, okay, fine. Sometimes they said, no, leave me alone. But sometimes they said, actually, I use Facebook this much because I live 100 miles from the closest living soul. And this is my only outlet. And in which case, that's not an addiction. That's a need for social connection.
Cool. Well, this is fascinating stuff. And as usual with all my guests, I feel like we could keep going and talk more and more about this. But as we kind of wrap things up, I got a couple of questions that I usually ask guests. One is, are you playing any games right now? Have you had time? Have you blocked out on your calendar any time to play any video games lately or not?
I haven't. The last game I played was Fortnite, and then I got into book promotion mode. So Fortnite was the last game I actually got into for a while, and then I got so into book promotion I haven't played it in a bit. But I love it. I think it's a great game. Yeah,
and it's super effective at keeping people engaged.
It sure is.
So, other question that I've started asking, and in a way, you've kind of answered this question throughout our entire conversation, but the question is, tell me about one good habit that you have. So maybe outside of what we've talked about so far, like what's a good habit that you've developed?
Yeah. So let me make sure I can define habits so we're on the same page, because I think a lot of folks see habits not exactly the right way. So a habit is defined as a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. But
I mean, good habits.
Good habits, right. Yeah. Well, there's good habits of both habits. They're both behaviors done with little or no conscious thought. I think a lot of people confuse habits with routines. For example, I have a writing routine. A routine is just a behavior frequently repeated, but it's not a habit, because writing is not something I do with little or no conscious thought. It's really freaking hard, right? You have to be fully present to write. Exercise for me is not something. I don't have an exercise habit. I have an exercise routine. I have to really think about breaking my record or pushing this or running. It's hard work. You have to be fully present with it.
That's a good point. So maybe I mean routine.
Yeah.
Like one beneficial thing that you do regularly and that you have gotten in the routine of doing.
Yeah, I think that would have to be making time for this routine of reviewing my schedule. Of looking at, so I do this in weekly increments. Every week I have time on my calendar to look at my week ahead and adjusting it accordingly. And I think that's improved my marriage dramatically. It's improved my productivity dramatically. And I just do it once a week. It takes about 15 minutes a week. I'll actually give you a link in the show notes that I built this tool that makes it really, really easy to do, because I think using Google Calendar is kind of an overbuilt solution for this particular thing. But having just a very quick calendar I can look at to know, okay, what am I supposed to be doing right now that I said I was going to do? Okay, got it. As opposed to, I got a big long to-do list. Which of 20 things should I do right now? No, I know exactly what I'm going to do right now. It's in my calendar.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. And so then finally, where should people go on the internet to find out more about you, the stuff that you write, the stuff that you do, and the book, Indistractable?
Sure. So I blog at nirandfar.com. Nir is spelled like my first name. That's N-I-R and far.com. And the book is called Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. And if you go to indistractable.com, there is an 80-page workbook that's there for free that I couldn't fit in the book that you can get there. It's complimentary. Cool. All kinds of resources, etc., all at indistractable.com.
That's like an exclusive free gift for this podcast listeners, right? That's only for them?
Not exactly.
No. Okay.
But they can get it too.
They're more than welcome. So
Yes,
they can use their imagination.
That's right. But it's there for the taking.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks again. And thanks to everybody listening for making it to the end of another episode of the podcast. Just remember, you can always go to psychologyofgames.com to find dozens and dozens of other episodes of the podcast, as well as how to subscribe. You can also find hundreds of articles that I have written about the overlap between psychology and video games. Find out how to follow me on social media like Twitter. I'm at Jamie Madigan. And you can also find out how to support me and make more of this stuff happen through patreon.com/POG. So Nir, thanks for being on. This was a really cool discussion, and I'm glad that we got to do another book club edition of the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.